So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for November 15th, 2023. We'll follow our standard approach of going through the agenda that was opened in the issue in the TSC repo. That issue was number 1471. Before we get started on that, does anybody have any news they'd like to share? Okay, if there's no news or announcements. We can move on to CPC and board meeting updates. I don't think there's any. I haven't made the CPC meeting for the last couple of weeks. I don't know if anybody else has and has anything that they think is worth sharing on that front. Okay, so I think we'll just say there's no updates there. So moving on to the issues tagged for the agenda. The first one is lib promote process binding / underscore tick callback to runtime deprecation. This is number 50687. If you added that for the agenda, go ahead and there you go.
Joey added it to the agenda there. I'm the one that opened the PR.
Okay. So do you want to just outline specific, what do we need to discuss or have an opinion on as a TSC?
Yeah, I mean it's process binding. It's deprecating it is a risk. The PR takes kind of the unusual additional step of kind of not just adding the runtime deprecation, but also setting up a transition path later on by adding a new command line flag that can control the presence of process binding, whether it's there or not. And currently it's there by default, even with the runtime deprecation. The idea would be later we would switch that so it's off by default, but users would still have the ability to turn it back on if they really needed to. And then later we could, remove it completely, making that CLI option a non-op. My proposal would be to do that over 3 major releases, but the way that it's structured, if we needed to have more time in that, we could push that final removal out, quite a bit further. Joy, Joy, speak for herself here, but just basically had some concerns. Obviously, I think everybody has some concerns on this. But then it's like discuss some of the alternatives, which could be runtime deprecating each individual binding or individual set of APIs exposed through process binding first, replacing some of those so that they're not as so it's not as dangerous, that kind of thing. They have been they've been pending deprecation for years now. It's not clear that pending deprecation has actually done anything. It doesn't. I'm not sure if it's actually moved the needle on people not using these things anymore. It's been sitting there without any plan for us to actually be able to move forward and remove this, which we do need to. It's holding us back from making larger changes internally that we can't completely hide away yet. So that's the
I don't understand why we should not just move process.binding to the entire deprecation for the next version of Node.js. I mean, the plan sounds way safer than it should be, in my opinion.
That was intentional. So go ahead, Joey.
Sorry, because I don't think that's necessary. If you look at why we actually need to deprecate process binding, one of the things that it exposes certain things that we do not want to expose. The other thing is that it could expose certain side effect for methods that something like the spawn wrap that allows people to spawn extra stuff. But I think that can be just filtered through. You do not actually have to just delete the thing from, because as far as I know, the last time I checked, a lot of the user and usage of process binding is just using the harmless stuff. For example, some error code in the UV binding, the sources of the native binding, those are like read-only constants that we, they can expose certain internals, but they're kind of harmless. It doesn't really cost us much to maintain them anyway, and you can just filter out all those dangerous parts and keep the original ones.
But we can also replace those harmless
Well-
parts with actually public-facing API, supported API.
Yeah, I guess the thing with that is that we don't have the hands to like invent all the alternative thing, and that's like one of the reasons why we're like thinking about runtime deprecating now. But I'm just thinking maybe like we can also just be lazy and just do a filtering. That sounds like easy enough. You can just open a list of go first contribution, like here's here's a list of all these bindings. You create a wrapper, you list all of them in the existing file. We have a file called legacy process binding that basically they just filter through everything from a certain binding. For example, we have something for UV. We have something for util, and we filtered out everything other than the is something methods. And we can do that for all the binding. And that's like not actually that much of work. You just like select what should be filtered out. And if it turns out that something actually needs to be added back, we either add them back immediately or like we could figure out an alternative. But like to me, it seems adding a thin wrapper for all these bindings seems like not that much of work, and it does not even need to like have very in-depth knowledge of node. You can hand that over to first-time contributors, and they can do that like in 4 months.
Well, my point is that I suppose we are doing that just because we want to have a smooth release on every major. But from Node.js Collab Summit, we also learned that they just don't upgrade Node.js on every major. They normally bump it from Node.js 14 to Node.js 20. So that I don't think it will change anything in the end. It's just more work for us, right? My point is, doesn't sound so risky to just runtime deprecate the process binding entirely and drop it in the other version.
I'm trying to understand a little bit on that. I don't think whether people use the currents or not really affects that. Like when somebody goes to make their update after say this proposed change happens, how much do we think is going to break? That's the important thing, right? And I think that's where maybe there's different views in terms of like, well, maybe not much, or maybe it's like there's going to be breakage and we don't care, but then other people are like, yeah, well, we do care about that breakage, right?
I have created a pull request to runtime deprecate the process binding in June, and before Node.js 21, and Node.js 20, if I remember right after, and I ran the system, and it was not failing. It was not failing most of the packaging at the time. They were not failing because of process binding. I mean, it's a runtime deprecation, so it might not break a test, but it can be quite noisy for the maintainers. I know that, but my point is changing the measure of Node.js wouldn't solve the problem, in my opinion.
Right. So I could understand that, like, how many times we do it over may not change the fundamental problem.
And I think like if we do a more incremental, I don't know, like if we only deprecate the dangerous parts, which are, really that should be deprecated, and we keep the harmless parts, I think there probably would not be that many warnings even, like, because I'm fairly sure, as far as I've seen, most of the userland stuff, they're using the harness stuff. And if you don't add warnings for those, then they will not see any warnings because like, for example, process binding config or process binding natives, they can expose internals, but like they're not really that bad. Just like scripts, for example, and we can just keep them. We don't really need to deprecate them. Like we don't even need to delete them. We can just keep them there. And like if you break, that's up to you to fix it. But at least we don't like issue useless warnings. That's not really that, not really like defending against anything dangerous.
Well,
It's not so much about defending against dangerous things. It's about giving us more freedom to make internal changes without, without impacting us. Like
we
for a
can
lot
also
of,
just say that. Sorry, we can also just say that from now on, we don't care anyone who gets broken by process binding. That's also like basically the same thing. You just like do some kind of major warning that, which is already what happens. We still do not really care much when we update the process binding. We can just
what's
say that.
different? But what's different about that and adding the runtime, the runtime deprecation? If that is noisy, we don't care. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same argument either way. Whether we remove it or whether we break it, you know what I mean?
But at least we do not really need to like deprecate the entire method. That's my opinion. We don't like the entire method is not that not that worthy of a huge deprecation. I mean, there are a lot of parts in Node that just like doesn't change at all. I don't see there's a point in breaking them. Like for example, people still patch FS bindings at this point, and that seems to work. They can just do whatever they want, whatever works for them, but it doesn't really pay us anything to like remove them. People are still doing this no matter what.
I would say though that that's not quite true, that we could just ignore people patching FS, because like a lot of the work that the performance team has been doing has been trying to create fast paths for FS calls, like when C++ needs to load a file to not go out through JavaScript to do it and things like that. And like if monkey patching file system is something we want to support, which it is, then we need to like build an API for it, not just like preserve the ability for people to monkey patch the way they currently are, even if that prevents performance improvements.
But like omitting a warning or like deleting it would not make a difference in that regard, because you have they have no alternatives. They just don't, and they will just like what they would do. Was that
it's not a supported use case. It's almost like a chicken and the egg problem, where like oh, you can't take this out until there's a new API that replaces it, but then there's no one's going to build that new API. Like the people at Yarn have been talking about this for years and they haven't made any contributions to start building this.
But they never, like, as far as I'm concerned, I never seen anyone block any changes just because it breaks them. They would say, yeah, this is going to break us. They're going to do whatever they can to like work around it, but they're not going to come back to no core to block something just because this breaks them. They're just, going to complain and find an alternative. That's not really like deleting it or emitting a warning is not going to make a difference because they have no other alternative. What you would lead to is that they're going to just not upgrade, which is worse.
Then why don't we just remove it?
Sorry?
Then why don't we just remove it?
We can like for example, the FS binding is different, but at least we can like start with exposing, like keeping the read-only parts. And then at the same time, we like even for the FS bindings, you can still like emit a warning for that. Because those are like more dangerous things, but I don't think it's necessary to like bind them all together. There are certainly harness stuff there.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it like we have a top level, a module already for constants. It's called constants. If we need to expose more of these constants that are process binding because people actually need to use them, let's do it there. And tell people that's where you go get them. That's the right place to go get this stuff. And and we can just go through all of the constants that are in process binding and just expose them there. That's like, a small PR to do that. And then just say, okay, process binding is going away, we're removing it, it's gone. If it breaks people, if the warning, just removing it is going to break just as many people as is adding a warning is going to break people. It's just going to be just as disruptive. So we're talking about different degrees of disruption here. Not completely eliminating disruption, but I mean, it's if we can remove code, let's remove code, especially if it's something that's getting in the way of us potentially making other changes.
And if it encourages them to build the API to do this properly, great. I'm a little like, I don't feel like it needs to be our responsibility to support use cases we never envisioned. If other people want to do these things, then they need to step up and contribute.
I think what I understand from what Joy is suggesting is like, let's, if we made a change that brings 100% of our users, that's not a good thing. And what I hear the suggestion is there's some way where like we change the things that actually hold us back, but we don't change the, the things that actually don't matter and don't hold us back and aren't dangerous. Like if that means instead of breaking 100%, we break 10%, that sounds like a reasonable suggestion, right? Like, in terms of trying to do the balance of like, let's do what doesn't hold us back, which maybe is only a subset of what's in there.
Yeah, and like for the 10% is another discussion about whether we want to break them first before we add any alternatives, or do we want to add alternatives before we break them? But like for a lot of the modules that are accessing just like read-only constants, there is like emitting a warning for that is like not very helpful, I guess, for either us or them. A lot of the constants we never like do anything about it, and it's like they're not actually holding us back. It's fine that like for now that you saw and access them, that they're harmless.
Like my take is if James's PR did what he proposed, but only did it for the non-harmless things, then Joy, you'd probably be okay with that. Is that a fair assessment?
A much more difficult change to make, because on Bootstrap, I would end up having to go through and basically lazily evaluate like everything, like on every single one of those exposed. So in the Bootstrap module that we have for process deprecations, it effectively means turning every one of those process bindings into either a proxy wrapper, and then I evaluate, is this a constant, is it not, or doing each individual thing. It's a much more detailed, bigger change than it's just tedious.
Is that actually so? Because like
if
for example, like first of all, we already have machine learning place for this. We already done that for natives and util. And there are like a bunch more that are like, for example, you can first ignore all the wraps. Those are like more dangerous bits. Like for example, UV is like fairly trivial. It's like takes, I don't know, 15 minutes to do something about UV, and you filter through all this stuff and pass them out. And that can also be done by a first-time contributor. It's not like something that you need an in-depth knowledge of Node. You can just like console log, process mining, see what's there. If it's a read-only constant, you add that to the list in lib internal legacy process binding, and remove that thing. Like we can even write a script to do this. It's like not a huge amount, like not something that needs a lot of intelligence to do even. So like my proposal is that at least we do that. Like we can set the deadline for this, like until next February, because the single major is not going to be released until next April anyway. So why not, like, put in some work, at least ask for help in doing these audits instead of just jumping into a breaking change that's not actually going to be released until April anyway.
I think we should probably move on to the other items on the agenda. We've had a good discussion. It can continue in the issue itself. So unless people think we should stick with this.
I'll just take, thanks for the feedback and stuff on this. Let me think about that. I mean, you make a good point there about the timeline. So yeah, we'll give that some more thought.
Okay, thanks. So the next issue on the agenda is backport most ESM and customization hook changes V18. This is 50669. So Michael, I think you opened the PR. And you also CC.
Yes, I opened it, and Matteo is not sure we should have it. I don't know. I guess he wanted everyone to have a look and see what's the general thought about this this backport.
And I guess the concern is that it's because it's breaking, right?
It includes, I think, the most breaking change is the fact that the loaders are in a separate thread. So the commit that puts them in a worker thread is part of this PR, and this is known to have broken a few use cases.
Loaders are still experimental in this older version.
Yes, and they have always been marked as experimental, and that they will change in the Node 18 documentation.
Or then yeah, I'm all for.
I think it was the APMs that had issues, right?
This particular change we shipped in Node 20, like 20.0.0. So it's already been out for a while, and people have had some time to, update in accordance to it.
And I think it was the APMs who were most impacted. Is that my recollection correct?
It makes sense. Yeah, I think they're really using it extensively. So
yeah.
And
I'm wondering if, like,
people
asking Brian or anyway, asking a couple people from the teams there what they're like. If they said, yeah, we'd prefer to have it be consistent, that would make it an easy choice for me, right?
I would assume like they probably don't want, like, the actual hooks changed. Like we added our new hook called initialize, like a bunch of things changed. So like supporting 18 at this point means supporting like an entirely different API. Right. So backporting all this stuff means they can just publish one package that supports 18 through 21. And then, if they want to keep supporting 16 or something, then that's on them. But at least like all the current lines of Node, they would have a unified API.
Right. Okay. That's my guess. So I think maybe it's worth mentioning them in the issue, just to get their opinion, because that could make the decision easier. And so I guess it's asked that it's on the agenda to get more people to chime in. I see Mateo's comment is like not balking, but hey, we'd like more people to chime in and comment, right?
Yeah.
I think that, Michael, isn't there some time pressure on this?
Kind of, yes, because the next V18 release is late. People have been waiting for it. There are important fixes in staging, so this shouldn't take too long.
Let me give it just a deadline. Just give it just a few more days if people have objections. But maybe give it till next Monday or something.
Yeah, next Monday sounds good to me. I will
so
be
are
away next Monday anyway, so for me, next Tuesday would be fine too.
Are you talking about the VN changes that the Jest users are waiting for?
No, no, I'm
Okay.
talking about URL parser fixes and things like that. So things that regressed in recent versions of 18.
Okay. Because I was I heard that about VA changes. I was like, did we do VA changes on 18? But sorry.
Okay, so
I'm not sure what you just talked about, Joey.
What changes was blocked is blocked by this thing? By the ESM and custom hooks.
The post
backports.
option.
Yes. So yes,
fixes, right?
the jest related fixes are blocked.
Yeah,
by
I
this.
was asking because I under the impression that it's not related to this thing.
I mean, there are tens of commits in this backport PR, and they are blocking a lot of future backports that should be done after that.
I think the conflicts might be trivial or like superficial in that, as far as I can think of, they are kind of like orthogonal to each other. But
Yeah,
I mean, if
sometimes
we
I understand, but sometimes even if conflicts are easy to fix, if you backport things out of order, it makes it
right.
more difficult for subsequent commits.
Okay, because I was just thinking like if it really needs a blocking change, a breaking change to like in my worth to actually just back forward that out of order, because I think essentially that change does not require any of these. But yeah, if you are up for setting a
So
deadline,
you think that
that's
if
okay.
we backport the jest related fixes separately, there will be no conflict? You think there will be zero conflict with the 75 commits that are in my pull request? If you're
That's my
sure about that,
impression.
then it can be done in parallel. I have no
can try.
objections.
That's my impression, at least.
I could tell you, Jerry, I already tried and there were conflicts.
I mean, I know,
So-
but I can just create a just rewrite it, because as far as I understand, there are probably some superficial conflicts, but not essentially like something that you cannot do without the other. But like if like that fixes that because that's a fix instead of anything breaking. So if that if it's really necessary, I can just rewrite that. But yeah, it depends on whether you think it's worth gets shipped with a breaking change.
Which breaking change are we talking about now?
The loader after, I think.
Okay, so the after thing we want it regardless. Is we didn't backport it to accommodate for the changes that you talked about.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not, is there any concern over the proposal that we wait until next Tuesday to take the decision based on whether anybody objects or not? I did comment in the issue to mention like Brian and Stephen from one of the UPM vendors in terms of like whether they have any concerns, so we can hear from them. Any concerns with that proposal path forward? Yeah, thanks. I just promoted, hopefully promoted both of them. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, I think in the interest of time, then let's move on to the next issue on the agenda, which is 50488. Move deprecated utils to runtime deprecation. I don't know who added that, but feel free to jump in while I'm looking that up. I see Marco added to the agenda. I'm still just, if anybody knows what the question is.
I mean, yeah, it's so similar to process binding. These are a handful of APIs that have been sitting on utils for a while that have alternatives already. So we have utils types, extends, the underscore extends is no longer needed. Util.log, I mean, I haven't seen anybody using util.log in years. I mean, there might be a few modules out on NPM from like 2002 or 2012 that might have them, but it's been a while. So these have been sitting there, document deprecated for the longest time, and it's just about time we go ahead and continue with the process to remove them. In which case, the runtime deprecation is the first step. The only one that I've seen kind of is that might be problematic is underscore extends, because there's still a few modules in use today that will make use of that.
Okay, so it's, and I do see one of the objections is like, are we actually getting value out of removing them or not? Or at least the step of deprecating, like, are we really going to remove them? Therefore, does it make sense to deprecate?
I just remember that there's one thing that we did for the buffer constructor, which is that when emit the warning, we detect that whether the warning is from a node modules, whether it's from a dependency. If it is, we don't emit the warning, because I think we ran into like a very, very noisy result when we try to runtime deprecate buffer constructors. I think we can like at least start doing that for these controversial runtime deprecation. Like, don't throw a warning if it's coming from a depth.
I don't think that changes much here. With the buffer constructor, it actually caused harm in the ecosystem because people were misusing it, simply because it wasn't a well-designed API. But here, these APIs are unproblematic. It's just that there are alternatives, and that's why they're deprecated. And we can remove them and force the ecosystem to move away from them, which isn't a big problem except in unmaintained modules, but partially emitting warnings only in some parts. I don't know if that's going to make any difference.
Yeah,
this is not really about causing noise or about forcing people towards better APIs. It's just about getting rid of APIs that we don't like.
I would say it's a little more than that. If they're unmaintained, we don't know if they actually still work. Like if they're
tested. They're still tested.
No, but I mean, like if they still work in the sense that like newer JavaScript features might like underscore extend, does it handle all symbols and all the other weird things that have come in JavaScript in the last few years? As it had whatever bug fixes jQuery extends and Lodash extend have gotten, like I suspect that these aren't actually bug free anymore, even if they were at one point. And so they've been rotting. And if we're not going to maintain them, then we should just remove them and people should migrate to ones that are maintained.
But what do we gain by annoying like people who are just using some third-party modules that do this? They are not probably not going to do anything about it. I suspect that they're actually doing anything about it.
Well,
Or like
yeah,
if you
it's
see
a
like very warning throughout of like a very long chain of dependency in some, maybe it's like 100 lines of no modules stuff in the stack, where they actually
but by that logic,
go
then we
figure
can't
out
remove
instead of
anything
just
ever. You know what I mean? Like this is unmaintained and it's probably buggy. If we either need to fix the bugs or we need to remove it. And
but
if
like
removing it means that someone needs to update something, yeah, it's like I don't know what to tell you.
We can still do a warning, but like just for those who are directly using it instead of those who are just including as a
any
dependency.
warnings that are like tell the difference between application code and node modules code?
Yes, yes, we do. We still have that.
I
Okay,
think it's
what-
unlikely that people who maintain modules are still using those APIs. So this wouldn't, I think nobody would see those warnings, basically. And also, we already runtime deprecated the Punycode module, which was still used by pretty popular libraries, and there were no objections to do that.
Yeah, and they
And,
updated away from me. Yeah.
So when I started to use Node 21, a lot of my projects started to emit the deprecation for Punycode. And so I think the impact was much larger than what it would be for those utilities.
So to summarize, what's holding us from the runtime deprecating it right now?
The objection is that it doesn't necessarily provide any value. Maintaining these APIs, we are not aware of any bugs in them. They have been behaving the same way for I don't know how many years, and it's not a huge maintenance burden. So the question is any potential breakage worth the little value that we gain from runtime deprecating them?
I mean, I'll say I don't think anyone gets any value from runtime deprecation. We get value eventually from removing it, like us, by having less code to maintain. And the runtime deprecation is the required step for us to do that. So it's the trade-off here is break people or make things easier for ourselves. These are older APIs. Yeah, we don't know the extent of who this breaks, and that'll be the thing we need to go investigate. Is like, is anyone actually still even using these? So I'm just going to do a quick Google or GitHub code search and see if I can see like util_extends.
Or like maybe you can like, instead of just deprecating them, like in all code at once, we can like first do a application code deprecation, so that like application code runtime deprecation, so that at least if you run the CI, if you have a CI, if the package is still like running inside some CI and someone still look at that, they will notice the warning and they will fix it, but it will not affect anyone who's just including that as a dependency. And then after a cycle, we'll do the full runtime deprecation, which is like it will also throw a warning when you are doing it, when you're only including it in your node modules. Like we need to add an extra stage, like to give package authors more time to like do this if they are still actively maintained. Instead of like,
are you suggesting this specifically for this deprecation or as a new general policy around deprecations?
For anything that we think can cause damage. There's only a lot of things that can probably like, it doesn't really harm anyone because they're very, for example, they're not as generic. For example, util can be pretty generic. Process binding can be pretty generic. But there are also a lot of APIs that are just not that generic and not that commonly used. And we definitely do not need to go through all that for this. But for this seems to be fairly generic. We can like do that first. We can add an extra stage. We already have that code.
So here's my challenge with this. I'm going to show you. Over the years, we've had lots of conversations of, should we deprecate this? No, it causes too much breakage. There's other strategies that can be employed, and like ideas for these other strategies are brought up, but there never really seems to be a lot of follow-up on them. Like there's other things that we could be doing for this, but the can just gets kicked down the road, and we go a few more years of just having things be deprecated, and just kind of it's just a never-ending open-ended question. So it's like we never seem to be able to get resolution on this. So the thing that I would ask is, obviously our current deprecation policy is not working the way that we all would like it, right? We need something better. Either we're never going to break code anywhere, just like the browsers, and we just keep this code around, and we need to have a strategy for doing that. Or we're going to be able to remove, or we're going to decide we can make breaking changes and we can remove stuff. It can't be some nebulous, undecided thing in the middle. So it's like the ask I would have is for the folks that think, no, like we really should not be breaking these, these things. There's no need for it. My ask would be, please come up with a proposal for a better way of handling these things that can be documented and put into part of the process.
Yeah, sure. I can, add a proposal to like do this extra step of runtime deprecation for, having a difference between application code and dependency code. But I don't think, it's necessary to abandon what we currently have to like, just go break everything and, abandon the deprecation process.
So the current status is documentation only deprecation, right? So we are expected to be have a runtime deprecation soon. So why is this considered as a breaking change if it's already a document deprecated thing?
So a documentation only deprecation is not a breaking change. We can make documentation only deprecations in minor releases, which is why the runtime deprecation has to be considered a major breaking change. So we could do a documentation only deprecation in 21.2 or whatever the next version is, but then we have to wait with the runtime deprecation until the next until the next major version. And it's not true that we have to move on to a runtime deprecation. I don't think there's any rule that demands that. There's a ton of deprecations that we have that will likely never move on past documentation only. It might be part of the problem that James is describing, but yeah, it's how it is.
I think we need a better way of communicating the documentation deprecations. Maybe it's working with definitely type to update the node types to have deprecated metadata whenever something's runtime or is document deprecated, to make sure that those things are out there and communicated clearly, and IDEs will get the line through and the annotation that it's been that the API has been deprecated, and hopefully that'll move the needle forward. The challenge I keep coming up with here is that it's not clear. Like, like folks will say, hey, just because it's documentation deprecated, that means guaranteed it's going to be gone. Well, no, that doesn't. It's always case by case, and always like after a long discussion, like, hey, it's runtime deprecated. Is it going to be pending deprecated? Is that actually going to work or not? We don't know. We don't know if those are actually effective or not. If it's marked pending deprecation, well, is it pending forever? In which case it's not actually pending. So the language we're using for this stuff is inaccurate and confusing. So it's just there's just a lot of confusion with this, and we just need to step back, rethink about it, and come up with something that is not confusing and something we can more deterministically on a instead of a case by case basis, more deterministically decide what is the policy going to be.
Okay, so yeah, I think we want to keep a little bit of time for a private session at the end. I think I'd agree, though. It sounds like we need maybe a session to chat specifically about deprecation, or somewhere that I think what I hear fundamentally is we don't have agreement, and what we've written down leads to us sort of trying to arbitrate every single time, and people don't feel that's working. So
yeah.
Next step is probably to have a larger discussion, not on this specific PR, but like on can we come to a better agreement on how we're going to handle deprecations. And so is there any other we basically need to switch to the private session? Is there anything else on the agenda that people were like, we absolutely need to discuss this week?
the only thing I'll throw is that there's the issue about the requesting the use of the winter of the node logo on the winter CG. It kind of needs to, TSC members to say yes, no. So if you haven't seen that issue over in the main repo, please go take a look and give it a thumbs up if you approve, give it a thumbs down if you don't. As long as there are no objections, the next step is to go to the foundation and ask them. They're going to come back and ask the TSC through Mateo, and then we'll go from there.
There's the two about persistent storage. I think the less controversial one is the one that Joey, I don't know if you want to talk about it, the one you added.
Yeah, I not sure if I should repeat what it is. It's about adding, for example, a environment variable that when turned on, you can node would automatically compile cocache whenever it loads a module, and then persist that cocache to disk. And then the next time node runs, and when it needs to load the same module again, it looks up the cocache from the file system, and if there is one, it compiled the code using the cocache, which would speed up the startup performance significantly. The reason why I bring this into core is that there is a very popular third-party module on NPM that
I
has
guess, sorry, but we're kind of running out of time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like we're down to our 5 minutes. So like, do we absolutely need to do this and maybe run over, or is this something that can continue, like we can leave on the agenda for next time? Is there a pressing question we need to answer?
It's just, does anyone object
let
to
me
this?
fast forward. Let me fast forward. So please read that issue and see if you have any other security concerns. That's basically the ask. Because I don't want to avoid. I want to avoid late surprises on theoretical grounds. There was a concern about security implication from Bendel House, which I guess we can override if there are nothing else. But just check it out and see if you have any other security concerns about this.
Okay, thanks. I think at this point I will say, okay, thanks for everybody for watching, and I'm going to stop the stream.